There are places on Earth where the course of history was bent, not in the great capitals or on epic battlefields, but on small, isolated parcels of land, places that became laboratories for new ideas, new ambitions, and new forms of cruelty. This is the story of one such place, an island just 21 miles long, which in the 17th century became the richest, most profitable, and most brutal colony in the world. An island so valuable, it was called the jewel in the crown of the English Empire. This is not just the story of an island. It is the story of a commodity that rewired the global economy, sugar. And it is the story of the human blueprint for industrial-scale slavery that was perfected here and then exported to the Americas, shaping the destiny of nations for centuries to come. When the first English ship landed on Barbados in 1625, they found what they considered a paradise, a lush, densely forested island, uninhabited. The indigenous Arawak and Carib peoples had been driven away or captured by Spanish slavers decades earlier. To the English, this was a blank slate, an opportunity. The first settlers were not seeking religious freedom, but profit. They tried growing tobacco and cotton, using the labor of poor white indentured servants from England and Ireland. But Barbadian tobacco was poor quality, unable to compete with the crop from Virginia. For 2 decades, the colony struggled, a marginal, unprofitable backwater. It seemed destined for failure. Then in the 1640s, everything changed. The catalyst came from an unexpected source, the Dutch, who had been expelled from their sugar colonies in Brazil by the Portuguese. They brought with them the secrets of a crop that would turn Barbados into a gold mine. They brought the knowledge, the technology, and the financial connections to cultivate sugarcane. The shift to sugar was revolutionary. It required massive capital investment for mills and boiling houses, and it completely transformed the island's landscape. The forests were clear-cut, replaced by an endless, monotonous ocean of sugarcane. But sugar cultivation was, and is, incredibly labor-intensive. The planting, the brutal harvest under a punishing sun, and the frantic non-stop milling process required a workforce on a scale the English had never imagined. Indentured servants were not enough. They could leave after their term was up. The planters needed a permanent, controllable, and expandable workforce. They found their solution in the burgeoning Atlantic slave trade. What followed was one of the rapid and horrifying demographic shifts in human history. In 1640, Barbados had a few hundred enslaved Africans. By 1680, they numbered over 60,000, outnumbering the white population 3-to-1. Barbados became not a society with slaves, but a slave society. An economy, a government, and a culture built entirely on the foundation of chattel slavery. It was a machine designed for one purpose, the creation of wealth through human misery. The wealth generated was staggering. Barbadian plantation planters became the richest men in the English-speaking world. This plantocracy built grand plantation houses, mimicking the lifestyles of the English aristocracy, all funded by the brutal efficiency of their operations. To control a terrified and subjugated majority, the planters developed a legal and social system of absolute domination. In 1661, the Barbados Assembly passed a landmark piece of legislation, an Act for the Better Ordering and Governing of Negroes. This was the first comprehensive slave code in the English colonies. It stripped enslaved people of all legal rights and personhood. They were legally defined as chattel, movable property, like livestock. The code gave slave owners absolute power of life and death. It sanctioned brutal punishments for the smallest infractions and offered no legal recourse for the enslaved. If an owner killed a slave while administering punishment, they would not be charged with a crime. This legal framework was not just about control, it was about maximizing profit. By dehumanizing the workforce, the planters could justify a system of labor extraction so brutal it was cheaper to work an enslaved person to death and buy a new one than to provide for their long-term survival. The Barbadian system, the large-scale plantation, the reliance on a single cash crop, and the brutal legal framework to control an enslaved majority was terrifyingly successful. It became the blueprint for colonialism throughout the Americas. The most direct and consequential export was to the North American mainland. As land on the tiny island of Barbados ran out, the sons of wealthy planters, known as the Barbados adventurers, looked for new opportunities. In 1670, a ship from Barbados established the first permanent English settlement in what would become South Carolina, founding a city they named Charlestown, now Charleston. They did not come empty-handed. They brought with them their capital, their expertise in the plantation system, and most importantly, they brought their legal and social model. In 1696, the province of Carolina adopted a slave code that was, in many parts, a word-for-word copy of the 1661 Barbados Slave Code. This system, perfected in the cane fields of a tiny Caribbean island, became the foundation of the plantation economy of the American South. The legacy of Barbados is written directly into the legal and social history of the United States. The sugar boom eventually faded. Other colonies surpassed Barbados, and the abolition of the slave trade in 1807, followed by emancipation in 1834, began the long, slow decline of the plantocracy. Barbados would remain a British colony for another 132 years, finally achieving its independence in 1966. And in 2021, it took a final step, removing the British monarch as its head of state and becoming a full republic. But the legacy of that tiny sugar island endures. The immense wealth extracted from Barbados and its sister colonies funded Britain's industrial revolution and financed the growth of its global empire. The system it perfected created the very foundation of race-based chattel slavery in the Americas, and its echoes can still be heard today in ongoing debates about systemic inequality and historical justice. What other small places have had an outsized impact on world history? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And for more deep dives into the forces that shaped our world, be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching.